All right, if you've got a trade law exam coming up, you're going to want to pay close attention. We're diving into a classic, the 1989 Canada-Japan lumber dispute. Now, I know, it sounds super specific, right? Lumber? But trust me, this case gets to the heart of a massive question in international trade. What exactly makes two products like each other? So let's break it down. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with what sparked the dispute over lumber. Then we'll get into Canada's whole, product argument and Japan's really sharp defense against it. After that, we'll see what the panel decided, which is crucial. And finally, we'll talk about why this ruling is so important, especially for your exams. All right, Section 1, a dispute over lumber. So what was this all about? I mean, on the surface, yeah, it's about wood. But really, it's a classic fight over what's fair in global trade. What a level playing field actually looks like. So here's the situation from Canada's perspective. They're looking over at the Japanese market, and they see their Spruce-Pine-Fir lumber, SPF for short, getting hit with an 8% tariff. But then they see almost the exact same kind of lumber from the US, or talking hem-fir, sailing right into Japan with a 0% tariff. Zero. You can imagine they thought, wait a minute, that's just not right. So Canada felt this was, blatant discrimination. So they did what you do. They initiated a formal dispute. They took it to the GATT, which, as you know, was the big precursor to the WTO. And their main claim? That Japan was breaking the most favored nation principle. And this is like rule number 1 in trade law. It basically says you can't play favorites. If you give your friend a great deal on something, you have to offer that same deal to everyone else for a like product. Now, this is absolutely key to Canada's whole case. They weren't arguing about raw logs just cut from a forest. No. They were talking about dimension lumber. Think of it as a manufactured product, a finished good. It's cut to super specific sizes, graded for quality. It's not raw material. The point was, on a job site, a 2x4 is a 2x4. It doesn't matter if it came from a pine tree or a fir tree, it's totally interchangeable. It does the same job. Okay, so this leads us right into the heart of Canada's complaint, their like-product argument. So Canada laid it out pretty simply. They said, look, according to the rules, if two products are like, they have to be treated the same, period. And as far as they were concerned, dimension lumber made from their SPF and dimension lumber made from other wood species, they were like products. End of story. So how do they argue this likeness? Well, they built their case on 4 main pillars. First, end use. All this lumber is used for the exact same thing, building platform frames. Second, physical properties. Canada argued that, there are some small differences in strength or look, but for a builder on a job site, they're totally interchangeable. Third, and this was a brilliant move, they pointed to Japan's own regulations. Japan's building standards treated all dimension lumber as one single product, graded on quality, not on the type of tree. And finally, they cited precedent from the unroasted coffee case, where different coffee beans had already been found to be like products. All right, so let's flip over to Japan's side of the story, because their defense wasn't just a simple counter-argument. Oh no, it was a complete reframing of the entire issue. Japan's position was, honestly, pretty genius. They basically said, this whole idea of dimension lumber, we don't know what you're talking about. Why? Because that term literally wasn't in their customs code. They explained that their tariffs aren't based on a product's end use. They're based on biology, on the actual genus and species of the tree. And this table just lays it all out perfectly. If you look at their tariff rules, you won't see words like dimension lumber or 2x4. Nope, it's classified by the scientific names of the trees. An 8% duty for pine, fir, and spruce, but duty-free for things like hemlock and Douglas fir. Japan argued that this was a totally legitimate way to structure their tariffs. It's just based on scientific classification. That's all. So you can really see the head-on collision here. Canada's view? The differences between the trees are minor, insignificant for how the wood is actually used. But Japan's view was the complete opposite. They said no. These differences in strength, hardness, and even resistance to decay are significant, and they lead to different uses in construction and how consumers see the product. So let's just recap Japan's key defense points. First, tariff sovereignty. They argued they have the right to create their own classifications. Second, they claimed it wasn't discrimination. That 8% tariff, it applied to SPF lumber from any country, not just Canada. Third, they insisted that SPF and hemfire are just physically different products and marketed that way. And their final point was a pretty big warning. If you let countries just make up a subcategory like dimension lumber to claim likeness, you'd basically break the whole system of tariff negotiations. Okay, so the stage is set. You've got two powerhouse arguments, two completely different ways of seeing the same thing. So, how did the GATT panel rule? Who won? Really, it all boiled down to this one critical question. Whose definition of the product actually matters? Is it the exporter's definition or the importer's? The way the panel reasoned through this was just methodical. And for Canada, it was crushing. You see, they didn't even get into a debate about the physical properties of the wood. First, they established that, yes, countries have a lot of freedom in how they structure their tariffs. Then came the knockout punch. They ruled that if you're going to claim two products are alike, you have to make that argument based on the importer's own tariff classification. You can't just bring in your own definition. So, dimension lumber, the panel saw that as just a commercial term, something completely outside of Japan's official tariff system. And this quote right here, this is the nail in the coffin. The panel found that Canada's reliance on this concept of dimension lumber was, and I'm quoting, not an appropriate basis for their claim. In other words, you can't just invent a product category that doesn't exist in your trading partner's laws and then sue them based on it. It's like Canada was trying to argue about specific types of apples, but Japan's rulebook was only written to talk about fruit in general. So the conclusion? Japan wins. But for exam purposes, this is the part you absolutely have to get right. The panel didn't find that the tariff was inconsistent with the rules. And it's so important to understand why. They did not say SPF and HEMFR weren't physically similar. They never even ruled on that. The ruling was that Canada's entire legal argument was flawed from the start because it was based on a definition, dimension lumber, that was totally unrecognized by Japan's tariff code. So why do we still talk about this case today? Because this ruling sent ripples way beyond a simple dispute over lumber. It set a huge legal precedent for international trade. All right, here are the key takeaways, the things you absolutely need to remember. First, the importer's tariff system rules. A like product claim has to be argued within that existing framework. Second, you can't just bring in your own external definitions from industry to try and force a match. And third, this case confirmed that countries have the right to create really detailed and specific tariff categories, as long as it's not just a sneaky way to discriminate against another country. So while the panel settled this particular dispute, it leaves us with this huge, lingering question that still hangs over trade law today. When does a perfectly legitimate, detailed tariff system cross the line and become a tool for disguised protectionism? How can you tell the difference between a fair rule and a clever trick to keep competition out? That's the puzzle this case leaves us with.